So welcome, Lou Rowan. I'm very pleased to have you record this short interview for poetry readings. You are a wonderful writer and editor. We have been studying some of your books in the seminar, and your collected works came out and are called Sweet Potatoes.
Yes.
So maybe in the wake of this book, could you tell us what made you become a writer and leave some kind of poetry for another type of poetry that is not quite fiction?
Yes. I think that after graduating from college, which was a disappointing experience for me, and moving to New York, where I began to experience society far more fully than I had in college and boarding school. That quite simply what happened was that the modern poets, which I'll call the New York School, and the people who had graduated from Black Mountain, they became my heroes. I remember the first time I visited Paul Blackburn, I felt as though I was going to a holy place, and it was quite an event, because my hero, whose work I loved, I had brought him a bottle of brandy because he was giving me an early book of his to copy, and I went to pick it up at mid-morning. And immediately he opened up the brandy and poured it into his coffee. So I learned something about my heroes. But I was a regular attendee at St. Mark's Church in the Bowery. And I found people like Jerome Rothenberg and David Anton and Toby Olson to be the kind of people that I wanted to emulate. And in those days, I was mostly interested in poetry. And so it was kind of that simple. It's sort of like, a kid who wants to become a football player. I had sort of that level of boyish enthusiasm about it. Despite, shall we say, the personal eccentricities of some of my heroes. And then I was able to meet, some, and get to know well, and also receive help with my preliminary efforts from Louis Zukofsky, who was not an easy person to be with, but he was really, really sharp. And he always said the same thing over and over again, be careful with your words. And he also said, most of writing is, or this would be my way of putting it, most of writing is editing. You don't write, you edit. And he would show me ways to sharpen my verse into poetry. So it was a kind of wonderful sequence of being, starstruck, and then wanting to, wanted to emulate what they were doing. At the same time, I was known sort of in social circles as being a good storyteller. And so that sort of lay in the background. And it wasn't until maybe 20 years later that I started I remember, yes, I lived in a suburb of New York, and I started a story, and I told myself that before I get anything else done in this world, I'm going to finish this story. I completed a story. That would have been in the 80s. So poetry in the 60s, and then sort of evolving into being a storyteller, if you can call me that, in the mid 80s.
You say a storyteller, if you can call me that, which catches my attention and makes me wonder about the formal qualities of your stories, because most of them show a strong sense of composition or decomposition, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about this, how you plan, whether and how you plan a story.
Yes. Well, it sort of depends on the length. If it's something short, that I just pick up my pen and start writing without any plan, but I know that I'm impelled to write, and what comes out is maybe 2 or 3 pages, then what I'm doing when I'm writing the story is as much echoing the words and playing with the people in them or ideas in them as anything else. And I usually do not know where it's going. With longer, what I would call stories, which become novels or pieces of novels, I usually know where I'm going, but I don't quite know how to get there. And so it's a combination of interacting with an interaction between the plan I have. Superman is going to go crazy trying to reform New York from a naive point of view. I know that that's what I'm going to do, but the details of how I'm going to do that, they occur to me as I'm going along. And then sometimes those details will suggest other details. For example, in my first novel, My Last Days, Superman's autobiography, the black girl who sort of baffles him, who lives in Crown Heights, I knew that I wanted to deal with racial injustice and with poverty, but she didn't occur to me until I was, halfway through, or wherever it is that she appears in the book. I knew that I knew how I wanted the version of New York City government that I wanted to do, the version of the future with the gentleman that I call Rupert Murd, and partly because of what it rhymes with, taking over everything. I knew that, but then another detail, which would be Cherry Trinken's Mama franchises, where she turns modern art into a commodity that you have to have. That occurred to me as I was sketching out the Murd section, which of course is itself a variant of whatever the name of the newspaper is that Clark Kent works for in the comic books. So there's no real research involved, but just because I looked up something about the Kent family, but I ended up not really including it. I sort of reinvented them. So I start off with general objectives in mind, and sections of the book in mind, and then they sort of fill themselves in as I work.
I feel that most of your stories combine a really sharp sense of humor with a fairly acidic cultural and social critique. So how do you keep these two together? And do you think that they're complementary in some way?
Absolutely. I think that I think that laughter, causing laughter, can be a wonderful intellectual weapon. If, for example, well, let's take the example of the Trump that I'm writing about now. I vary with names that I'm giving him in the book that I'm writing now about recent presidencies. But I think the best analogy for him is a professional wrestler, the fake wrestling. And people take that seriously. And the fact that he's, obese. In fact, I begin the Trump section by saying he's the fattest president since Taft, and the richest since, I can't remember, maybe Washington. I think that if, we don't, with professional wrestling, either you ignore it or you go to it and you're a big follower of it. If we could get people who go to professional wrestling to think of it as funny, they wouldn't go. So I'm trying to make Trump into a buffoon, which I think he is, a wily buffoon, if that's not a contradiction in terms. And so laughing at him is a way of deflating him, I hope.
You mentioned the more philosophical dimension of laughter by relating it to Bergson's theory.
Yes.
So maybe the distance that laughter establishes is also another aspect.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Distance in a lot of senses. Distance in the sense things just don't make. There are a lot of things that just don't make sense to me. As I was saying to some of your very bright students, we could, if we just redid our budgets, the major economies, and spent on human needs and environmental needs what we spend on preparing for war or engaging in war, we could solve, shall we say, a lot of problems. And I find that absolutely logical to think that way, but the world doesn't. So I'm losing the question a little bit here, but I think of distancing and caricaturing as intellectual weapons as well as emotional ones.
So maybe just one last question. When I read the title of your collection, Sweet Potatoes, yes, I thought about small potatoes.
Yes.
And as a consequence, not so small potatoes, which is very much in line with what you've just said.
Sure.
So how does the title really play with these idioms? Well,
it's partly it's partly that I went to a restaurant in London and had the most marvelous dinner when I was extremely depressed about something. And I was searching for a title for this anthology, and it just occurred to me, I'm going to call it Sweet Potatoes because I love them. And it was that simple. Well, and also because they're the plural, there are a number of different stories in the book, yeah.
Well, thank you very much, and we'll be having a reading later tomorrow, which will be videotaped, so you will be found in video as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That intimidates me a little, but I like that. All right, thank you.
Thank you.